Oh, I got it here. Good evening. I'm Marcia Root. I'm president of the Los Angeles Planning History Group, and I'm so thrilled to see so many here and so many people that I know, and so looking forward to our discussions. And we're joined tonight with DJ Waldie. I call him the Sage of Los Angeles. I named him that. He is. Our conversation with him tonight will focus on his recently published book, Becoming Los Angeles, Myth, Memory, and a Sense of Place. Our discussion tonight will be moderated by board member Ken Bernstein, principal planner, City of Los Angeles, who is also with us for his book, Preserving Los Angeles. Conversations with the author is a series to highlight important research and history in the areas of planning and community development. Authors participating in this series have included David Sloan, is a cemetery dead, Ken Bernstein, that I just mentioned, Preserving Los Angeles, Ken Farfsing, Black Gold and Paradise, Barry Siegel, Dreamers and Schemers, that's on the 32 Olympics, Liz Valletta, By Right, By Design, Josh Stevens, Urban Mystique, Notes on California, Los Angeles and Beyond. Our next conversation will be with Bill Fulton, well known to many of you, the author of Place and Prosperity, How Cities Help Us Connect and Innovate. He'll be with us on April 13th, and that conversation will be moderated by Josh Stevens. Josh is a member of our council, advisory council. I would also like to take this opportunity to announce our upcoming colloquium. It's entitled, working title, but this will do, Los Angeles Olympics, 1932, 1984, and 2028, Lessons from the Past for the Future. It will be held at the Huntington Library and Gardens on Saturday, March 25th. And that will be, our meeting had to be canceled March 14th of 2020. So we're back, we're back. We're over 40 years old. We're dedicated originally to preserving planning documents from the region. The mission has evolved to promoting the active use of planning history to inform and guide policymakers, planning professionals, and academicians, creating LA's future. We have a 10-member advisory council, well-regarded experts in planning and related fields. The purpose is to broaden our resources and to have a broader outreach to the Los Angeles region. I believe with us tonight, Vaughn Davies, Deborah Murphy, council. Anybody else that I missed that's on our council? Looking at the name, I think so. Anyhow, I'll continue. It's we've been based at the Huntington Library for over 40 years. We've conducted business virtually for a long time now, it seems to be, because of the COVID pandemic. I'll read you the list of board members, and these are special people to many of us. And I'm president. Mark Herwick is on with us today, vice president. Lillian Birkenheim, secretary and IT specialist. Dan Beal, treasurer, can't be with us. Ken Bernstein, Aaron Chase, Art Cueto, Ken Farfsing, Todd Gish. I think Todd's with us too. Ken Perez, Alan Rifkin is with us, Betsy Weissman, Sergio Valdez. After DJ Waldie's presentation, I encourage you to say your questions. And rather than typing them into the chat box, it sort of makes it impersonal almost. It's like a Western Union telegraph, so-and-so said this. So we encourage you to participate in it. It makes it more fun for you and others. Ken, I'll turn it over to you to continue and introduce our author this evening.
Thanks so much, Marcia, and good evening to all of you. It's so wonderful to see so many old friends, longtime co-conspirators and others with us today, and really pleased to see the turnout and the interest, which is so well deserved for our conversation with the author, DJ Waldie. And I think there are really is no more keen observer of life in Los Angeles and the Los Angeles region than DJ Waldie. He's been called by the Los Angeles Times a writer whose essays and memoirs conjure the idiosyncratic splendor of Southern California life. I first became aware of his work in the mid-1990s with his book, Holy Land, a Suburban Memoir. And he's written other books on Southern California, as well as been a contributor to many publications, including Kenyon Review, Salon, Los Angeles Magazine, book reviews and commentaries in the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other publications. He lives in the home where he was born in Lakewood, California, which he describes so poetically in Holy Land. He rose to become Lakewood's deputy city manager. And in fact, he is coming to us tonight live from the city of Lakewood's facilities. So we're pleased to have him in his home domain and being able to share his thoughts with all of you. And we're here tonight to discuss his latest book, Becoming Los Angeles, published by Angel City Press. Angel City Press has been offering free shipping this week to those who purchased the book for tonight's event, and I'm sure the link will be pasted into the chat. DJ will be presenting for about 10 minutes or so, some reading and some kind of introductory scene-setting thoughts on his book, after which he and I will discuss some of the key themes of the book, and I want to draw out some of the themes that really connect to planning and current planning issues. We'll talk for about 20 or 25 minutes or so, and then, as Marcia said, we'll open it up to all of you, and I'll call on you if you raise your Zoom hand, and we'll have a conversation. And depending on we have a large crowd tonight, which is wonderful. Depending on the flow of the conversation, I think we may go a little past the top of the hour, but we'll be sure to wrap this up no later than 7:15. So with that, let me turn it over to Don for a few thoughts.
Well, my thanks particularly to the members of the Planning History Group, and of course to Ken and to Mark and the other organizers of this evening's conversation, and all of you who are attending this evening. I also want to thank Patty Calistro and Scott McCauley of Angel City Press, who have been over the years kind enough, or maybe just optimistic enough, to publish two of my books, Where We Are Now, Notes from Los Angeles in 2005, and of course, the one we're talking about this evening, Becoming Los Angeles, Myth, Memory, and a Sense of Place in 2020. You may recognize the first part of that book's title. It comes from the Natural History Museum's exhibition, Becoming Los Angeles, which opened in 2013 and which was extensively revised in 2018. The Natural History Museum exposition creates a timeline for Los Angeles history using a particular visual cue. Events with a particular historical importance are called out by a metal ribbon overhead that literally touches down on exhibition cases that hold something from key moments in the city's history. My book, Becoming Los Angeles, is not organized in this way, not by a linear time reaching down to touch an artifact in a museum case. To use the language of anthropologist Kathleen Stewart, my work is organized around the radically particular in order to drag things into view that are already being lived and felt. My book is organized by places, things, and memories reaching out to touch me. For me, these encounters and their persistence in memory actually become a mode of knowing. Neil Campbell of the University of Derby, I should say, in England, is one of the originators of a field of inquiry called critical regionalism. Campbell has a take on Stewart's idea of affective history, a history that feels like something. And here I am quoting from Campbell's work. It is through the intensities of things close at hand that we might become more attuned to the world around us, connecting the local to the global, not through abstraction and distance, but rather through interrelation and specificity. And for me, the idea of specificity is incredibly important. In Kathleen Stewart's terms, it's the radically particular. Becoming Los Angeles is radically particular and tries to drag things into view. It's a book that's discontinuous, intimate, and concerned with local knowledges that are, I think, a potential mode of knowing. And if that's the structure of this book, discontinuous, intimate, concerned with local knowledges as a way of knowing, what is the book about? In fact, what is everything I've written in the past 30 years about? It's about a sense of place. From what experiences does it arise? By what combination of memory and experience is a sense of place sustained? What value can it have? And what's lost when a sense of place is erased or when it's never been fully embraced? My exploration of a sense of place on those terms began with Holy Land, a suburban memoir in 1995, in which I tried to discover the elements of my own sense of place through the materials and memories of a very, very ordinary suburban childhood. And then through where we are now in 2005 and Becoming Los Angeles in 2020, which reflect on the significance of a sense of place, its significance to politics, to city planning, and to the city that Los Angeles was becoming at the start of the 21st century. And those books also offer strategies that have been used to evoke a sense of place. Some of those strategies are successful, some have been debilitating, like the fantasy past that makes Los Angeles so dreamlike. I happen to think having a critical sense of place is as essential as having a sense of self. So this book, Becoming Los Angeles, is my mapping of Los Angeles, past and present, to know where I am and my relationship to it. As I illustrate in Becoming Los Angeles, a sense of place is embodied knowledge. It's the means by which I write myself into the story of Los Angeles, inhabit that place as a home, and negotiate my way from the purely personal to the broadly public. I write with a purpose. I think placeless Angelenos are aliens in their own home when they lack a sense of place, and that has consequences for public policy and civic life. Harold Ramis, the late actor director, moved back to Chicago from Los Angeles because he said, "I'm local," which in LA is meaningless because no one's local. Well, that's not true. My book offers examples of how to become local in the tangible and the familiar, and how that sense of place can overflow into the activities of civic life. I emphasize the ordinary and the commonplace because in them, the alienated Angeleno acquires wayfinding landmarks, discovers places of memory, and learns neighborhood lore. The local isn't self-enclosed, it's permeated by what's outside. The local is engaged. Let's see. My notes have gotten a little out of order here. Okay. For author and critic David Hewlin, the very act of living in Los Angeles requires an ongoing process of reconceptualization, of rethinking not just the place, but also our relationship to it, our sense of what it means. So Ken, if I may, as we talked about earlier, I'd like to read a short excerpt from the book's introduction, which might serve as an entry point to our conversation. So this is from the introduction to Becoming Los Angeles. A brief excerpt. Author and architect Michael Molson wondered, and I'm quoting here, has Los Angeles reached a point where past vocabularies of the city and of urbanism are no longer adequate? And at this moment, the very word city no longer applies. Perhaps it's not a city. Perhaps it can only be described as Los Angeles, which prompts my own question. If not a city, what have we made? And if Los Angeles is beyond words, what unspeakable thing is being made of us? A sui generis Los Angeles, having muted our ability to imagine it, can be described only in terms of wonder and dismay. Tomorrow has arrived for a city that saw its true self in the future. But tomorrow has come with unexpected company. The working poor, the discarded homeless, the shrinking middle class, and the callous hyper-rich. Conditions, environmental, economic, and demographic, that Angelenos thought were fixed are rapidly transforming. How are we to be Angelenos when Los Angeles isn't exactly Los Angeles anymore? When it's not just the sum of its cliches, without the option to escape to another suburban utopia. To paraphrase urbanist Benjamin Schneider, Los Angeles may be a dream world to the rest of America, but to its residents, Los Angeles is simply the place where they are, as beautiful as it is infuriating. Historian Eric Munkonen insisted that Los Angeles is permeated with localism, with patterns of living, working, and remembering characteristic of beloved places. Places, Kathleen Stewart argues, become memorable from the resonances that linger in familiar scenes and commonplace relationships, steadily picking up texture and inference over time until everything at hand becomes, as she says, charged, overwhelming, and alive. In our becoming is the potential for the intimacy that moved Finnish architect and urban philosopher Juhani Palasma to declare, and I'm quoting him again, "I experience myself in the city, and the city exists through my embodied experience. The city and my body supplement and define each other. I dwell in the city, and the city dwells in me. To inhabit and to be inhabited allows me to experience Los Angeles in relationship to who I am. The reciprocal touch of the city and its dweller, reinforcing an awakened sympathy." And that's some thoughts that I have about this book and, broadly speaking, about the work I've done for the past 30 plus years.
Well, just wonderful. Thank you so much for those opening thoughts and that reading. I think you can all tell that this conversation with the author, we've had some wonderful authors on planning books as part of this series, but none are as eloquently, as elegantly written as Becoming Los Angeles in the collection of writings we're talking about tonight. I think when we were talking about this event, though, I think DJ's initial reaction was he hadn't really written perhaps a planning book, and obviously the themes are a much larger set of themes about Los Angeles. But I wanted to kind of tease out some of the either explicit or implicit planning topics that you do address. And I want you to start with what you've just talked about in terms of a sense of place. And I love talking about your work as and your mode of observation as radically particular and intimate. And this observation that increasingly, how do we deal with a Los Angeles if it's not if Los Angeles isn't Los Angeles anymore? And to think about what planners often deal with, Los Angeles, planners and this group and many of those who are here really are working to create a sense of place. That's been their life's work. But we deal with these issues of erasure in our city, where the past is wiped away, and displacement is a key challenge for many of our planners that undermines our sense of place, and we begin to kind of verge into displacement or disorientation. How do you think about this type of erasure and disorientation when you think about a sense of place, and how planners should think about that?
Well, these are really powerful approaches to thinking about Los Angeles as it evolves in the 21st century. We can talk about erasure as Norman Klein does, it's specifically in terms of buildings and places that have been erased from the landscape, built over or buried under later accretions. But erasure also affects memory. It's kind of its aspect of sort of willful amnesia, which is characteristic of an awful lot of thinking and writing about Los Angeles. And so we need to be attentive to not just the erasure of physical structures and places, but erasure of our memories of Los Angeles, because even lost places have a location. Even lost places are locatable in memory. So that's part of what I have been trying to do in this book and in my work generally as a thinker about place is to encourage strategies for preserving not just physical structure, a building, a home that might have historic significance, but preserving all kinds of places and all kinds of memories that are often overlooked because they are so local and commonplace and everyday. I take I take a great deal of time to think about wayfinding because as Ken knows, and maybe some of you know, that I'm not able to drive and never been able to drive. So as an obligatory pedestrian in Los Angeles, my experience of the city is radically different, to use that word again, from perhaps maybe many people in this conversation. I know Los Angeles in a sensory way, maybe unfamiliar to some of you. So I look for places of memory in my traverse of my community, step by step. And I look for a sense that I have I have created a body of memory that provides me perhaps a tool for finding my way in the place where I am.
Yes. Well, I do want to come back to some of those topics of memory, but you did just mention the fact that you are a walker, that your point of view is that of a pedestrian. And again, many of the planners who are here tonight have been leaders in really helping to shift Los Angeles from being an auto-oriented metropolis to a more pedestrian-oriented approach. I see Deborah Murphy, and founder of LA Walks,
Yes.
and many others who are all about that type of pedestrian advocacy. And you've described the way that you're attuned to place as a kind of tactile intimacy. And I love that term, that you're coming in almost physical contact with place. Could you describe a little bit more about how your stance as a walker shapes your view of the city and your writing?
Well, the conventional view of an Angelino is that he or she departs from a home in one locale in the LA basin, gets in a car, drives some distance on the freeway grid, gets out of that vehicle and enters another place in the basin, and the space in between is immaterial. It has no material existence to the automobile bound Angelino. There's the beginning place, and then there's the ending place, and in the place in between is either a void or consists of just a collection of cliches about other parts of Los Angeles. Whereas for me, as a walker, every footfall plants me in a place. There is no nowhere when you're a walker. There's always somewhere, filled with possibilities for encounter, for wonder, for reflection, for reminding me about some other place, for connectedness across the boundaries of time and memory. Walking as a discipline is, I think, a very useful activity, and I would encourage, I suppose, planning and architecture students to give up their vehicle for a year and spend a wander year, as they used to say in German, a wander year, walking and using public transit in a place like Los Angeles, and would acquire a completely different understanding of how the environment and the built environment and the natural environment, a completely different understanding of how those things impact one, literally impact one.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. Let me come back to the question of memory that you've raised, and I loved a segment of your introduction in which you wrote, "Planning for a denser, more connected city could begin by acknowledging the durability of prior choices that still shape the built environment." And again, so much of the work of many of our planners today has been dominated by our housing crisis, the need to promote infill development and plan for a denser city. But what did you mean by that? And where do you see that durability of prior choices, and how should planners think about that and observe that in their work?
Well, listen, that's true in a number of different dimensions, and I'll just touch upon a few of them when I talk about the durability of the plans that came before. Part of the problem with Los Angeles is the belief that a better city is always in the future, and we can ignore a good deal of the city today, because the city that's becoming is going to be the city that'll actually solve our problems or resolve our concerns. And we don't think about the fact that the past clings to us and clings to the built form of the city. I'll give you just one wonderful example. The downtown Los Angeles, the historic core of Los Angeles, is disoriented. It's not on the rectilinear grid of the Jeffersonian survey of American spaces. It's based upon a Spanish colonial grid system, part of the law of the Indies from the 16th century. It's cocked about 35 degrees from true north and true south. And so when you drive from the American grid onto the Spanish colonial grid, you're moving from one imperial imagination into another imperial imagination. And that disorienting is something that's unlikely to change. That is a persistence of the past in the present. We're always going to have to deal with the fact that we move from one grid to the other. But in a more in an area that's more focused on my suburban experience, although Lakewood was built all at once between 1950 and 1953, and the houses are as old as they are, it's unlikely that they're going to be bulldozed away in any time soon to replace them with something else. So how do we persist? How do we maintain whatever the sense of place embodied in Lakewood while we deal with questions of density, for example.
Right. Just a quick reminder to everybody also, if you can mute your microphones until we do open it up for Q&A, that would be helpful. I love that you mentioned, of course, this idea that we are kind of a forward-looking city, but that has blinded us at times to memory and looking at the past. I do love that the title you chose was Becoming Los Angeles, whether from the Natural History Museum or otherwise. This sense that we are constantly evolving, constantly progressing, and constantly changing. Again, I think that resonates with planners as well. I called my book Preserving Los Angeles, very similar title, maybe a little more backward looking perhaps, but it meant to be backward looking, again, using history to look forward into the future. And I think our books were actually linked by one columnist who called them gerund Los Angeles books, which I was amused by. But this idea that Los Angeles is constantly evolving, and also that there's a sense that Los Angeles is always somewhat flawed, and there's this need for kind of self-improvement or improvement of the city, that we're a deeply flawed and contradictory place. Is that what resonated with you in terms of choosing a title and the way you approach Los Angeles?
I emphasize in this book and other work that I've done over the decades that though we are in the process of becoming, though futurity is built into the DNA of Los Angeles, and a reluctance to value the present is part of the Los Angeles experience. Although all that is true, I try to argue that the persistence of the past, the lingering effects of the past's understanding of itself, and the reality that places in Los Angeles contain the capacity to encourage a sense of place, but that sense of place also touches upon the past. That when we make a new Los Angeles, when Los Angeles becomes something else, enough, I don't know what the right word is, of the past needs to be part of our thinking. Mm-hmm. We need to be attentive to the past and our memories of Los Angeles as much as we are attentive to the bright, shiny city that is going to become tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one area that we've really had a blind spot in terms of our past has been our failure to connect with our indigenous communities and our indigenous heritage in this region. And I have to acknowledge my own blind spot, and I think institutionally our city's blind spot with regard to this, that we have not fully taken stock of our indigenous heritage. We are just now, and we're very proud in the Office of Historic Resources, City of LA, we're just launching an effort to create our first Indigenous Historic Context Statement, a framework for understanding our Native heritage and Indigenous communities in the city. But I think you write very eloquently, as always, again, about the the overlooked Native peoples of the LA region. I assume you'd agree that that's been a blind spot for LA.
It has been. And when I speak about the past, which tends to suggest that I'm focusing on the past that I know best, or maybe the 20th century past, or maybe the late 19th century, early 20th century past. I really think that when I talk about the past, I have to be conscious that I'm talking about the past of 5,000 years ago, and 1,000 years ago, and 500 years ago, in the dynamic cultural and human history of the settling of Southern California, which doesn't involve me or Anglo-Europeans at all. It belongs to those indigenous populations, and that not only needs to be acknowledged, but it needs to be woven into how we understand the past in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. And also when you talk in and you said tonight, when you talk about a Los Angeles that isn't Los Angeles anymore, and constantly changing city, I also think about the impact of the recent changes that we've had as a result of COVID, the pandemic era that we've just gone through. And your collection of pieces in the book, I think, goes from around 2008 or so to 2019, 20, right on the verge of, and the book came out in the midst of COVID. I had a similar challenge with my book, and kind of felt like I felt compelled to add a COVID afterward. I had this sense, is this city I was writing about still the city that we inhabit? And how do you think about that now that the kind of the quiet of quarantine has finally lifted? Do you feel you still recognize and that your observations about Los Angeles pre-COVID are still the Los Angeles that we inhabit today?
Well, I think my experience of the COVID period, which of course is still continuing, and the experience of many other Angelinos suggests that the city that is becoming is going to be very different. The sense that something is hanging over us, the ominous quality of the COVID experience, the dissociating aspects of that, the alienating aspects of that, reinforce some of those features that are embedded in the more recent history of Los Angeles before the COVID experience. I fully believe that the Los Angeles that I knew as a young man, the late Mike Davis called it the libidinal adolescence of Los Angeles. That Los Angeles is not, we don't have that anymore. The idea that you could jump into your jalopy and be anywhere in the LA basin in 25 or 30 minutes is not who we are anymore. And if we frame our understanding of Los Angeles based upon those kinds of memories, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Willful amnesia is one way of making bad choices politically and civically, but remembering remembering wrongly Los Angeles is another way of getting mistakes embedded in plans and in policies and in laws.
But maybe that libidinal Los Angeles was a freeway-oriented, very suburban metropolis as well, and I think one thing that I would note is that you probably are the keenest observer of suburban Los Angeles and the realities of suburban life in Los Angeles. And I think in many ways, kind of sprawl has hit the wall. The orientation of planners has changed in terms of wanting to promote more compact development, more density. But at times, I think the planning profession may have had kind of a little bit of an anti-suburban orientation. There's kind of the view that suburbs are necessarily unsustainable, kind of dystopia. And your view of the suburbs is much more nuanced. So what's your message? You're saying that Los Angeles is maybe gone, but what's your message to planners thinking about suburbs in the way that you are observing them through tactile intimacy as you do?
Well, I do believe that the adolescent and libidinal Los Angeles is passing away, but I don't believe places like Lakewood are passing away. There's not a bulldozer idling at the end of my block ready to turn my neighborhood into something else, a pure expression of somebody's idea of a good plan. Much of Los Angeles is going to look suburban for a very long time, but be essentially urban. Los Angeles, the built form of Los Angeles for me is suburban in structure, urban in action, urban in life. I don't think that pairing of the uses of space or place in Los Angeles is going to change radically in the near future. It obviously will be more dense, and there'll be more different kinds of structures and buildings that have multiple uses. But we're going to be pretty much what we are now for a very long time. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think Los Angeles has an interesting approach to how a city might be organized. I don't think of Los Angeles as a collection of failures that need to be fixed. I think of Los Angeles as something greatly different than that. I actually think of Los Angeles as a beloved city and a place of potential redemption, and certainly a place where people could be able to lead decent, dignified lives. That's what Lakewood promised returning GIs and their wives and children in 1950, was nothing more than a decent life. It wasn't paradise, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't ideal, but it was enough. It had enough of whatever is needed to make a decent life. Didn't have too much, it only had enough.
Thanks. And we're going to open it up for questions. So please formulate your questions, get ready to raise your hands in just a moment. But before we do that, I did have to ask you, I mean, the topic that's dominating public discourse in Los Angeles right now is our crisis of the unhoused. And you, within Becoming Los Angeles, wrote a chapter called Becoming Homeless. And what was compelling about that to me was that you, of course, write about some of the statistics behind homelessness, but even more so, some of the stories you included of those who died on our streets in Los Angeles. Could you speak a little bit about how you took on this topic? Presumably, I think it's one of the final pieces you created for the book, and how you think the homelessness crisis is shaping Los Angeles and our sense of place since you wrote the book.
That chapter was framed by my own encounter with a homeless young man who I encountered almost daily for a fairly long period on my walk to Lakewood City Hall. I live about a mile and a little bit from Lakewood City Hall, and my morning walk would find this young man often sitting or standing in the public areas that are near the entrance of City Hall. And I saw the gradual deterioration of his circumstances from being homeless, but having some of the material effects of a 21st century life, a cell phone, a laptop, other things that made sense as a 21st century life, until ultimately toward the beginning of 2021, he was reduced to carrying an opened sleeping bag and nothing else except the clothes on his back. And that profoundly disturbed me. Whatever attempts I made to intervene in his circumstance, he resisted. And I despaired of his of the rest of his life in my place. And that chapter in the book is actually rather despairing itself.
Mhm. Yes, thank you. So with that, I do want to open up the conversation to all of you. So if you could please raise your hand, you can do that under, well, let's see.
Before Ken goes on, I'm going to let Ken be the moderator here and play teacher. With my appallingly bad eyesight, I may not see your hand raised.
I'm happy to do that. So I will moderate. So the hand raising is under reactions at the bottom of the Zoom panel. So you can raise your hand and I will call on you, those of you who'd like to enter our conversation. Anybody, everybody's shy to start. I don't see any hands raised. Mark Herwick, let's have you start. Mark is our vice president of the board for Los Angeles Planning History Group and LA County Regional Planning.
Again, I would like to thank both of you very much, and Don for speaking about your book, and Ken leading this question. So it's been fascinating to think about Don being a pedestrian his entire life and wayfinding landmarks throughout, I think, the whole area, the whole region we probably refer to as Los Angeles. So Don, in your mind's eye, what are some key landmarks that will stick with you forever? And will they be forever landmarks throughout Los Angeles?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Of course, they won't be forever landmarks. Some will persist and others won't. In my own narrow world, everyday life in Lakewood, there are landmarks that are there's a tree that grew over a fence at the end of my block that was always there, and its boughs, its limbs arched over the sidewalk. And in the fall, a very persistent orb spider, certainly not the same one from year to year, would weave among those limbs, those boughs, a glorious orb web, which I had to either avoid or in the worst case scenario, without thinking, walk into. So that tree was a landmark to be noted, to be recognized by season, and to be avoided at certain times. And then the homeowner at that corner property cut the tree down. So my landmark is gone, and I have missed that tree. I pass by that location virtually every day, and I remember that tree. So even though it's a lost landmark, it persists in my memory. It is not entirely lost. It is found in my memory. There are other landmarks of a similar nature in other parts of the world I travel in. Because I use public transit to get from one place to another that I can't walk to, there are landmarks along the bus route that remind me I'm getting close to my stop. Since until recently, buses and bus operators didn't consistently call the stops. So you had to know where you were in advance in order to pull the bell cord to get the bus to stop at your stop. So you were always, as a transit user, I was always aware of where I was vis-a-vis various visual cues in the landscape. A sign, a house, a peculiar way in which the road curved, those kinds of things. And then there are landmarks like businesses that persist. A wine bar on Atlantic Avenue in Long Beach has been there 11 years. I know it well. It's like a local. It's it's a kind of like Kears. It's a landmark of conviviality and a destination for someone who enjoys a glass of wine.
Thank you.
Let's go to Vaughn Davies.
Uh-oh, I thought you'd give me a little bit more time to
Oh,
think
no.
about my question, but that's all right. I guess I'm fascinated about this idea of landmarks, and as designers, we're always looking at precedent and other examples that we can carry with us to new projects and new work. And if you think about Los Angeles and in the context of the ideal city, are there lessons learned and attributes or elements that you might think others could learn from as elements of the elements or components for an ideal city? In other words, precedent that others should take with them from your wanderings, let's say in LA?
Well, I do believe that in designing a place, a building, a plaza, a larger unit of built space, that the design, either through architecture or through the planning process, ought to thoughtfully and consistently consider how can intimate, small scale places of memory be located in this new development. We often encounter buildings that look great as a model, but don't feel very much like a place when they're built. They fail to contain the kind of visual cues that might evoke a sense of place. And we often deal with larger developments that may deliberately push away the possibility of a sense of place, because since places tend to invite lingering, thoughtfulness, reflection upon, being in a place long enough to see the passage of light across the surface of the building or the surface of the elements in the forecourt or the landscape. Today, sadly, a lot of buildings say, don't stay here. Don't linger here long enough to see something happen in the environment, and don't understand how the natural world is operating here. Get in or get out. And so I would suggest that one of the realities that planners and architects ought to deal with in making more habitable places is to give places the habitations of memory, places that memory can lodge. And I'm not sure exactly how you would carry that out in today's world, but we can see those kinds of places in older communities and in other cultural settings, in other cultures.
I think it's a reminder to us all, I think, what you're saying, that we should actively see ourselves as participants in the places we're designing or the spaces we're designing, not just observers who see somebody else using it or see it from an aerial view, but rather be in it.
I'm as Ken might know from other work that I've done, I'm profoundly opposed to aerial views.
Great, that makes two of us, three of us.
Second that.
No
Thank you,
axonometrics.
Yeah, and so Vaughn, of course, has been a leader in urban design, really from the ground and from the pedestrian perspective. So really pleased you're part of this conversation. I also want to bring in Rick Cole, who comes, I think, from a similar perspective. Rick, most recent director of nationally of the Congress for New Urbanism nationally, and we're really pleased that he's bringing his expertise and career as an urban thinker and practitioner back to the city of LA now as Deputy City Controller. So welcome back, Rick, and eager to hear how you and your perspective.
Thank you, DJ, for just an extraordinarily beautifully written book. You talk about, in various chapters, a newspaper publisher, a television personality, and others who talk about or write about or create a space to think about the topics that you were raising. I'm wondering, in this changing Los Angeles, as a writer, as a thinker, and as a talker, how do you see our ability to talk with each other when the Los Angeles Times has shrunk to a shadow of its former self, when there aren't the kind of public affairs shows on television that happened before deregulation, and a need for young people who wouldn't, even if those did exist, wouldn't be using them, how we pass on and continue the conversation so that voices like yours in this generation and in the coming generations can share this ability to think about who we are and where we are.
That is one of the compelling problems of today, is how can an intellectual, a cultural, and a psychological, and I would say even emotional culture, how that can be transmitted without the mechanisms that sustained all of those elements in the first 2/3 of the 20th century. I don't have an answer to your very pertinent question. I wish I did. There are those who are suggesting that there are lines of transmission that are evolving, that are developing, that will do the kinds of work that a daily newspaper, a weekly a neighborhood newspaper, a journal, an intellectual journal, a national publications, national magazines of thought and criticism, how that those things might be recreatable in other forms, but I don't know. I've not seen it particularly. I go back to the days when Steve Wasserman was the editor of the standalone book section of the LA Times, which is often a rather voluminous section. I had the pleasure of writing about the things we're talking about today in that, and that was that book section was a wonderful platform for the kinds of things that you have raised in your question, and that all of us are this evening talking about, and that's not there anymore. And I don't know what is coming after. I honestly don't know. But something needs to happen, otherwise we will become culturally deracinated, and the histories and emotional psychological aspects of our lives together will become very thin, and as I fear, even more alienating. Someone should have an answer to this question. I don't.
If someone wants to jump in on that point or otherwise respond to it. I did want to ask, in terms of opportunities to bring the city together, if it's not through a recreation of some of that media press connective tissue that we once had. We do have, as Marcia mentioned at the outset, we're doing this program in March on the Olympics, and thinking of Los Angeles as an Olympic city, looking back at 1932, 1984, looking ahead to 2028. Do you think that the Olympics, certainly I think many of us who were here in 1984 felt it did, in a sense, provide a sense of place, a sense of connectedness? What are your hopes for 2028 and how we might learn from 1932 and 1984?
Well, of course, the 32 Olympics was an attempt by the economic and political elite in Los Angeles to establish the city of Los Angeles as more than just a joke to East Coast elites. The 84 Olympics was a wonderful celebration of what it meant to be Los Angeles at that moment, both beautifully designed and strikingly fun. But I think anything that we do collectively, like the Olympics in 2024, has to be really much more deeply embedded in all the different ways Los Angeles is Los Angeles. Our purpose is not to lay claim to being a big city, as in 32, or a city that had shrugged off some of its troubles and was ready to have a good time in 84. We need to be collective events like the Olympics in 2024 need to be really smart about all the different ways Los Angeles is Los Angeles.
Oh, thank you. You know, I do see in our virtual room tonight, I see at least 2 former city council members. I see Michael Wu, who is part of our group's advisory council. I see former council member Joy Pikus. And I have mentioned in the past that Joy gave me my first opportunity in public service as a volunteer high school intern in her district office a very long time ago. So it's really wonderful to see both of you and good friends. Wanted to give either of you the opportunity to jump in. I also see former city planning director Con Howe with us. Would any of you like to jump into the conversation? Joy, go ahead.
Okay, this is more of a comment than a question, but I can't resist. First of all, I much admire you, Ken, as a former intern. I'm terribly proud of you. And DJ Waldie, whose works I have read over the years, for the resources that you brought to us today. Secondly, I admit to being a first-class cheerleader for the city of Los Angeles. I think that for much too long, we have allowed ourselves, I think the picture on the screen, at my screen, is not me. So we might want to correct that, but it's not I who I see. Los Angeles has let itself be defined by others who I think were jealous of the city of Los Angeles. How often do you live in a place where just a few hours away, you have the ocean, usually it's not hours away, you have the mountains, you have the desert, and all this beauty, and then the land itself of Los Angeles with so many things in it that are so beautiful to see, from the Griffith Observatory to the top of where the Getty Center is located, and all of this great wonder. And I think that we're awakening to the fact that the suburbs are not something to be hidden and forgotten, that for baby boomers, they were a marvelous place to be raised. I know, as the mother of a baby boomer, I know that suburban life was enriched in many, many ways. In addition, Los Angeles economically held two of the major forces of the last half of the 20th century, the aerospace industry and the movie industry. And where do you elsewhere find such dynamic moving forces as those are, and more, if you wanted to think and to add to it. Okay, that's basically the culture. Los Angeles is an incredibly rich cultural city where you find music and dance and theater and museums and all of this that is first rate, that is exceeded by maybe 2 or 3 other places in the world. Maybe in the world there's more than 2 or 3 places, but in this country there aren't a lot of places with more culture and enrichment for those who can take advantage of it. So I think we need to preserve what we have to move on, as with the Olympics, to move ahead. Sports, I didn't mention that, but we certainly have activities for those whose lives are very engaged with sports. So I don't want people to ignore or put down Los Angeles. I think it's a wonderful, thriving, beautiful city. And I wanted to put my 2 cents into this.
Thank you so much, Joy, and great to see you. DJ, do you want to respond?
Oh, I would just say that's a wonderful corrective to pessimism. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm a skeptical optimist is what I am.
I didn't mean to characterize you as a pessimist at all.
No. And I'm definitely not a pessimist about Los Angeles.
Thank you. Would others like to jump in? Larry Kaufman.
Yes, I have lived in Los Angeles for about 15 years now, and I'm an architect, and I've lived in a lot of places. I lived in France and studied architecture there, and in Clermont-Ferrand, and I walked everywhere. And when you walk, you experience the city in a totally different way. And I walk a lot here in Los Angeles. I live in an area that is real close to Allen. And we have some landmarks here that one was almost torn down a number of years ago, but people resisted. and it's where the Brown Derby was at Los Feliz at Hillhurst. Well, it's now a Chase Bank, and there's a few other things located there. But they preserved the ceiling of that building, and it's quite wonderful example of engineering. So if you take the time, you'll see a lot of stuff. People sometimes go and save buildings and create new things in it because that's the natural nature of buildings. You take it over and you make it something new. Buildings change. There's a lot of tear down I've seen in the city. At Hillhurst and Franklin, they tore down a kind of a dilapidated house at a gas station. Now they put in a mixed use building, which has apartments above and retail space below. And then across the street from that, they took an old Rite Aid and converted it into a natural foods market. So,
Larry, thank you. Let me just interrupt to say, this tonight is really about DJ's book. My own book, which I didn't want to overly plug, Preserving Los Angeles, is about the themes really are what you've just articulated, how Los Angeles is preserving and adaptively reusing its historic buildings and really creating economic regeneration and revitalization as a result. But DJ, do you want to react to Larry's comments?
Well, one thought that has gone through my mind through this evening and maybe touches upon what was just said a few moments ago, and that's gentrification. And gentrification can appear to preserve landmarks in a neighborhood, but we have to be thoughtful that landmarks aren't simply a structure; they're also an embodiment of memory and lived experience of those who live around it. And a gentrified landscape may no longer be a landmark to those who live in the neighborhood because their stories have been drained out of it.
No, that's right. And I think we're increasingly beginning to see that and adjust the preservation movement around that to think about really people-centered preservation. If you preserve the buildings, but the people can't afford to live there, or if they're displaced, what have you preserved? So I think that there's definitely been a shift in that direction.
Yeah.
Art Cueto. Art is one of our board members as well for the LA Planning History Group.
Hello, DJ. It's great to meet you. I don't know if it's so much a question as it is just a comment or observation, but when I remember back during the 80s, Phil Collins had a song. I think it was "Take Me Home," and it had a video which was really amazing. What he did was that it was him singing the song in different cities, like he was sitting on the bank of Sydney Harbor with the Opera House in the background, and then next scene he's in Paris and the Eiffel Tower, and the next scene he's in New York and Times Square and stuff. And it was all, take me home. And then when he got to Los Angeles, when it got to see San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, when he got to Los Angeles, he was sitting in a backyard somewhere in the Hollywood Hills with his feet in the pool and the Hollywood sign in the background. And I always used to think, is that all we have? Is that all we think of? When people think of Los Angeles or Southern California, it just seemed like such a placeless commentary. But your context about what our landmarks, I mean, same thing. Our person who lives across the street from us, he had this beautiful old tree that the city cut down because it was in danger of falling, and we missed that tree. But I was just wondering what your thought was on that it just seemed like such a lost sense of identity, if you will, on a large scale.
I've almost given up moaning about how often and easily Los Angeles is misunderstood and how often and easily Los Angeles is turned into a collection of cliches that other people have imposed upon the city. I'm just over that. I don't really care very much about what the New York Times has to say about Los Angeles. There's almost always a collection of cliches and mistakes. I think that my work as a writer and earlier my work as a public official in the city of Lakewood was aimed at creating reasons for paying attention to a place, my place Lakewood, the larger place Los Angeles, and creating reasons for why you should value it. Indeed, to be wildly romantic about the whole enterprise, reasons for falling in love with it. And I agree with the late 19th century California philosopher Josiah Rice, whose core concern in writing about the American experience was, how do places become beloved? And he had a prescription for that, which may not be usable today, but I'll nail my flag to whatever mast, whatever flagpole that points to a beloved city. I think we can do much with what we have, as flawed as it is, as flawed as we are, if we learn to fall in love with the places where we are.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We have just a few minutes remaining. Want to give an opportunity for any final questions. I did want to maybe draw into the conversation, if I can put her on the spot. I see Deborah Murphy here, and Deborah is, along with DJ Waldie, really among the most passionate advocates of walking and being a pedestrian. And I want to put together these two eloquent voices for the walker's perspective in Los Angeles and see what might come of it. So Deborah, if I could just have you unmute for a second, and then any reactions that you have to DJ Waldie's work.
Oh, well, thanks, DJ, for sharing your experiences of growing up and continuing to live in Lakewood, and really dedicated to that place, and that you get to touch and feel your city. I think people do experience, as you said, when they're drivers, they are in their metal box, they get to the, they're in one box, they go in driving in a box and then get to another one, and they miss so much. And that was really the reason why I wanted to start Los Angeles Walks, was that reason, was to remind people of what they're missing by just driving, and how they could really become to know their place in the city, that they could smell the flowers, that they could hear kids playing, and that they could hear music or whatever else. And I think what you've brought to the discussion tonight about, loving the place that we are, and the kind of small things that are out there. They don't have to be big, glossy, flashy things. And I don't know, I'm really pleased at this discussion tonight, and hope that we can share this with a lot of our friends, so that they can hear this dialogue, and that people would read DJ's book, and go visit Lakewood too. I think it's a gem of a community. I was just in a meeting this morning with an interpreter, Spanish interpreter, who is from Lakewood, and she just, she's not a planner, and she described the kind of experience that you have in Lakewood. So I think it's something for us to all go explore neighborhoods all around Los Angeles. And to me, that's what LA is about. It's about all its interesting, fun neighborhoods, and that everyday life that's out there.
A couple of thoughts, and I'm risking a lot by saying the next one, but I'm happy to provide anyone the $2 tour of Lakewood if you want to come and see what this place is about from my perspective. And the other comment, of course, based upon Ms. Murphy's encounter with translators today, is that what interests me about staying in Lakewood, why I continue to live here, is I want to hear the stories of the new residents of Lakewood. I want to hear the stories. I may already know what they are, but I want to hear them in the voices of a new generations of first-time home buyers, which is still fairly common in Lakewood. That interests me hugely. How vastly different demographically, ethnically, and racially mixed community, how it will make use of the materials that my parents and their friends made use of in the early 1950s. That excites me. I really want to see how that works out.
Wonderful. I'm taking you up on that $2 tour.
All right.
I think I might too. We might need to hire a bus for a walking tour of.
No bus. We walk.
We walk, and I can bring the Spanish language interpreter, and she could bring along some Spanish language folks, and we could all
Yeah,
experience
let's
it
make
together.
that an activity from our group.
Yes, we might. We have a board meeting coming up, so we will talk about actually following up on this offer. You may regret how much interest you have.
Well,
That sounds wonderful.
I guess I won't give you the $2 tour. I'll give you the $10 tour.
Ooh, okay. I think you've got a deal. I think with that, I want to bring this wonderful evening to a close. Again, Becoming Los Angeles, a remarkable collection of writings from DJ Waldie. Thank you, Marcia. It really has been an honor to have you join us tonight. Thank you so much for your generosity and all that you shared with us this evening.
Thank you all. Thank you all. A wonderful, wonderful evening. A wonderful opportunity to share so much with you. Thanks again, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don.
Everyone.
Everyone have a nice evening.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, DJ.
Thanks, Ken. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.